But if you can just say your name, organisation, something about you're passionate about at work and in your personal life too.
My name is Roger Harkins, and I'm principal member of the excuse me. I'm from the ERE principal, but I work at the Credit Centre and have been for the last year. This is interesting as well, the whole internet access, because I have some disability and this access to the internet is restricted as well because of this inability to reach. So that's an interesting one for me. What I find really fascinating at the Creative Centre is the amount of positive energy that comes into the community from the Creative Centre. So meetings like this just add to our using that now. Yeah, but I'm really interested in this internet. So I think I'll get the opportunity.
Okay, thank you. So this morning we got to know each other a little bit, talked about how the internet can help to reduce barriers for people with disability participating in the community in various ways. And we talked about various ways that the internet can be used. And you all came up with some great ideas to share between various groups, and we even looked at the possibility maybe of having an ICT and disability coordination group to move forwards on some of the ideas that we discussed this morning. We also, I think, at the end talked about the possibility that young people at the Creative Centre and maybe elsewhere who are passionate about using the internet and very skilled can do some training in the ministries or other places about how to use the internet. And we also heard that maybe we could look at ministries providing some funding to assist the Creative Centre in internet connectivity. All of these things are on the discussion level only, of course, but it's a starting point. So what I'd like to do now is give an example of a person whose life really changed in using the internet, and I'll give a couple of other examples as well. So the person I'm going to talk about is Rakesh Chan, and I'm sure Laniata knows Rakesh very well. He presented at a workshop I ran that was funded by the Internet Society Community Grants Program on capacity building in internet policy with accessibility in mind, and this was in PNG a few years ago. So I'm using his slides and talking in the first person as he presented it. So I'll read it out. It's still a little bit faint on the screen, and I tend to read out. I have a habit of reading it out because sometimes there are people who are blind or vision impaired in the group, and it's good that everyone can have the information on the same basis. So Rakesh says, because I am blind, access to information was fairly difficult to me before I started using a screen reading program over 10 years ago. I never enjoyed reading so much since I got my hands on this awesome screen reader. When I left school in 1984, I heard that there was a demand for school leavers to go into computer science. My heart ached with sadness when I was told not to have such a dream, as there was so much demand and expectations that I might lose out due to my abilities. After hunting for jobs that would feed and keep me in the city on my own, away from my parents, I decided to work for Westpac as a telephonist. Got appropriate training with a telecom training centre, a secretarial school, and some English and law courses with the then Fiji Centre, an arm of University of the South Pacific. In the mid-90s, I heard about screen readers and slowly learned about emails, internet, and the vast opportunities of reading via voice software. It was like a light shone in a dark tunnel. Whenever possible, I'd practice typing on any keyboard my fingers touched. I didn't care about the screen, but just wanted the accuracy and speed. In 2000, I applied for a training course through Fiji Disabled People's Association and United Blind Persons of Fiji to JICA. And JICA is a Japanese aid agency for a training opportunity which was available to people with disabilities in Tokyo. Finally, in 2001, I and another colleague went for a 9-week comprehensive training program on technology for people with disabilities. Upon my return, I requested the bank to invest in JAWS. JAWS is a screen reading program for blind people. It's quite complex to use, to learn to use. And also for the bank to invest in a computer at work. As things were slow, I opted to get a loan and purchase my own laptop with JAWS. And bearing in mind, JAWS software costs probably up to $1,000 US. It's very expensive software. And it needs to be updated as well when you have the operating system updated. I should also point out that there is free screen reading software called NVDA, which was developed by 2 blind men in Australia, and that's being translated to a number of languages internationally, and it's on the par with JAWS now. So it's just useful to be aware that there is free open source software that can be used. So Rakesh says, I strongly felt that there was nothing to stop me and that I had to prove to my employer that my performance at work could improve if I was given the opportunity. Yes, certainly the pipeline was indeed very long, and it took approximately another 5 years before I found a desktop computer with JAWS on Westpac's computer network. And today the bank has even gone miles further to purchase a Kurzweil reader. Kurzweil reader is it's like a advanced scanning device, so you can put a piece of paper on the glass, just like you do with a photocopier or a scanner, and it outputs to speech. Or if the person has a braille device, which again is very expensive, to the braille device. And he says, it's yet another expensive but very helpful piece of technology for me. And he says, so eventually in the process, I lost my old title of switchboard operator. Today I'm a customer service representative. I talk to customers and help them to make better decisions about their finances. I'm able to sell different products to them, and I briefly help managers and customers to get some vital information that helps both parties before they come to a face-to-face interview. I also email forms and information that customers need. It offers them immediate and prompt service. So all in all, this is an example of how accessible ICT is very crucial and important for people with disabilities. They can see the path he took. He pushed very hard to get to where he is now, and he had to take out a loan. He used this initiative, and now he's got a good job. And so it's a combination really of the person themselves and the technology and where they can go with that. And there's another story, Fa'alo Tumapu from Samoa. She's blind. She also presented at the PACINET conference we had in American Samoa. And she did a media communications degree in Australia and returned to Samoa to work in a radio station. So that's another example. There's a telecentre in the Solomon Islands that's run by people with disability. Now, this is a little while ago. I'm not sure if it's still operational, but it's another option to think, because often we talk about telecentres. And yes, there needs to be accessible equipment if people with disabilities are to use it. But people with disability can actually run the centre. And so it's turning it upside down again. So they're just some stories. We've already heard stories from you this morning. You know, you've demonstrated what you do. Are there any other stories at this stage that you'd like to share that you know, someone from the Cooks managed to move forward with the use of technology? It doesn't have to be doing degrees or going overseas to train. It can be something else that you'd like to share. Yeah. And can you move? Yeah. And I apologise, you didn't get the chance before to speak.
Yeah, it's just some education into classes and but I was thinking about just going back that one of the chief grants areas in the interviews to find out the Zero project what's going on with disabilities because they have to do with incarceration. And so I'm using to a lot to Google for disabilities. So I just implore all of you to put all your information on the internet because that is the source of collecting information for people who are working in the industry. That would not be my point, but the other point was that we do use the internet a lot in education, in schools. We are communicating with the Northern Group via Skype. We have access to the wall because of the geographical challenges. And we also have assistive technology, laptops, and iPads in the schools for students with disabilities. And that's including home. But again, the challenge is even though we provide technology, we're not providing internet access. And that's not for students with disabilities, it's for all students, including Latino students. So while schools are connected to the internet is prohibited for students to use on a regular basis. One thing actually in terms of middle school, so we're using iPads to provide students with autism with a means of communicating through a picture exchange program. And that also has a verbal component to it. Really inspiration. Okay. So it's in fact depends on funds too. And so an interested person might have a request for an item, and so they flip through the folders, and it's a downloaded app. On Apple, unfortunately, none of this with the software drivers from within New Zealand anyway. And then that student request and use sentence structure actually to request and communicate. And that could really change from symbols because people with autism tend to want to have a visual symbol, but also can be translated into text. So that is one way where there's technology in the classrooms, but not internet.
It comes back to the cost issue. It just comes back to that all the time. I think it's so loud and clear. Yeah. Are there any other stories that anyone would like to relate that we haven't done so far? Would the young lady from the Creative Centre? Just say a little bit maybe about how you use the internet and what you do.
I put all the photos on Facebook and I give it to her to look at it.
You have a look on our website and our Facebook site, all the pictures and all the updates on the Facebook site is things with. We just go and updates on what we're doing.
Right.
So sometimes we have sometimes we get a cup of tea. 2 minutes later, a cup of tea's on Facebook. So have a look. So that's one of the actions.
So when you use Facebook, you put the photos up and you write messages to your friends and so forth. Is that around Raro or elsewhere as well? Do you have friends in different places? That's yeah. I mean, you're traveling the world on the internet, and you've got an opportunity to get to know people from across the world, which is fantastic, and they get to know you, and in your life here.
As an organisation, really active the workers people are commenting about what they're doing, and they can see what you're doing, and they can just see what everyone's doing and make some comment, make some contribution. So it's really about education that you're talking against it. It's always something about page.
Excellent. Yes, yes. Great. Okay. Okay, so hardware and software. We've already talked a bit about that. I just wanted to clarify, we've got accessible mainstream products, and Matiti's got, I think it's a Samsung, and iPads have an amazing number of apps that can be used in a variety of ways, and it's preferable, if possible, to have mainstream products rather than specific assistive technology or adaptive technology because of reduced costs. But you know, the iPhone or the Samsung, they are still very expensive. I'm well aware of that. But to have specific assistive technology like the JAWS program, up to $1,000 US, it's really high cost. And the other thing is with the built-in updates. So it means when the software and the operating system updates, you don't have to pay anything extra, it's just done there for you. But there's an important role of assistive technology when mainstream products aren't accessible. And it's important that mainstream products allow the easy compatibility with assistive technology. So when you are looking to buy assistive technology, think about how does it fit with the particular device you're using and how does it work with updates, because it could be expensive with that sort of thing. So they're just things to consider.
Just a question.
Yeah. It varies tremendously. Like I've mentioned, JAWS screen reading program. That's $1,000. There's other programs that might cost $500. There's some hardware that costs several $1,000s. So I can't pin it down because there's such a wide range of equipment.
So between 500 and 5,000.
I'm not going to pin it down to that because you can get some assistive technology that is cheaper than that. I mean, Matiti mentioned the augmentative communication was $40, and so some of them are reasonably priced. So it depends, and so you need to find something that suits a particular person, and often the best thing to do is to find someone who is, say, an occupational therapist or a speech therapist, who works with technology and understands particular disabilities. So it's a matching of a person with the technology. It's not saying, here's a piece of technology and we'll try to match a person to the technology. We really want to steer away from that if possible. And I recognise that it's hard to find people like that, but there might be some way of connecting up with people in New Zealand or Australia. So with your device and your software, how did you decide on that particular piece of software? Yourself.
We went to Computer Man, and Computer Man, which is our sort of computer shop, and expert. And we just explained what we wanted and said, can you search for it? And he did all the research. Because if we'd done the research, we might not have come up with anything specific. He did the research. He also downloaded the Talking app onto his own phone. And Matty went along and he could try it out and see what worked, what didn't. And then Matty said he wanted one with stylus as well, but he didn't always have to use his finger to type it. So it was a case of asking someone who knew about technology to meet up with Matty and discuss what Matty's needs were on it, then to actually be able to try out the app to say, yes, this works, and then getting $2,000 worth of funding to do it. But it was very important that someone who knew what they were talking about. We could look online and got totally the wrong thing, but also that Matty could actually physically test it before we went for it.
It sounds like you have a very good person there in the computer shop.
Very good.
You're very fortunate.
Yeah, he's very supportive. The Cook Foundation, which will give up to $2,000 to, they specialise in individuals, not like big funders who have a whole group. Many people who need something like $2,000.
This is for sharing.
Our mission is for those students who have difficulty reading. Once you can't read, you can't access anything. So we're wanting some easy, screen reader that these people that's my son, who can actually access information that's out there at the moment. People are restricted how much information you can get from that if you can't read. I'm sure ministry has statistics on literacy and stuff. New Zealand's probably about 5% of the population are illiterate. So there's straight away 5% of the population that do with some sort of assistance. I see the high end of the market is those quite complicated devices that assist people, but nothing on that basic level. Where instead of stop giving someone to try and teach someone to read all this right, say, hey, at this point we're going to introduce this technology so you can access information. That's what it's about, accessing information. So let's stop pushing the barrier and get something that's going to help people. So if anybody's got any knows of any software, maybe we should that's what our issue is.
And I maybe after we finish at lunch, we can have a look at one piece of software called GoSay, which might work. You can download a test for it, but then we're looking at several $100s to buy. Go, no, SOSAY, S-O-S-A-Y. And there are in some cases there's reviews of particular software that would work better than others. Screen reading software for blind people, there are established products like JAWS, Window Eyes, Supernova, and NVDA, and NVDA is the only free one. But when it comes to what Roger's looking for, when it's for a person who doesn't read and might have learning disabilities or dyslexia, there are some products, but it's falling between the cracks a little bit. And this again is where, if there are particular occupational therapists who understand both the disability and know the range of technologies, that's where there might be a match. And again, in Australia, and I'm sure it's the same in New Zealand, there are independent living centres in each state in Australia, and there's also a national one that has a database online where you can search for products, and that can be any products. It can be mobility products, wheelchairs, walking aids, shower seats. It can be communication devices. It can be computer hardware and software, and phones. So you can browse through that. They actually have a walk-in service where you can talk to someone and go through the particular issues, and they will then suggest a number of options. But they don't sell the products. They provide information about suppliers. And that's how it operates in Australia, and I can find out how it is in New Zealand. Just moving on to the concept of universal or inclusive design. A person with a disability being able to use a product or service as effectively as a person without a disability. So we've got an equal playing field again. And creating products right from the start that consider the needs of the whole community, including people with disability. That's what we mean by universal or inclusive design. And there are key principles of inclusive design that can be applied to internet products and services. And I've put in a link there to an Irish organisation that has developed a really good set of these principles in relation to ICT. These universal design principles actually came out of the architectural environment, just to look at how a building is designed to be accessible, like, you know, it should be ramps, should be wide doorways, and the idea is that is good for someone using a wheelchair, but it's also good for someone who is delivering things on a delivery cart, or someone who might be pushing a pram or something. So they are the sort of things we talk about with inclusive design. It's always more cost-effective to design things from the start that are accessible. And that includes websites. So we'll talk a little bit about websites either later today or tomorrow. Are there any questions about that? So I mentioned accessible mainstream products. So we've got accessibility built into Microsoft and Apple software. I'm not sure if you're aware, but with Microsoft products, there are an accessibility. Do you know about that? No? There are accessibility features built in that you can use if you have a look at the actual operating system. And with Apple software, it's integrated. So with Apple software, for example, you've got a screen reader called VoiceOver. Again, fairly complex, but it's actually built into the system. And Apple, with the iPads and the iPhones, have a lot of accessibility features. And if you and I know with the Samsung they have too, but I must say that Apple is still at the forefront. If we take some things that the iPad have, I'm not sure if anyone has anyone seen the accessibility features on an iPad? No? No, not really. A little bit. Okay, well, all you do is, and I'll pass this around, you go to General and under Settings, and there you can choose Accessibility, and they then have separate sections for vision, hearing, learning, physical and motor. And you can turn on or off some of these. So for vision, there's VoiceOver, which is a screen reading software. Zoom is to zoom in on text to make the fonts bigger. Invert the colors, so rather than having black on white, you can have white on black, for example. Speak selection, speak auto text, there's a lot of different ones there. There's larger text in general, so you can choose like all the text to be huge, for example, someone with low vision. You can have bold text. You can have different button shapes, like if someone has poor motor control, they might need bigger buttons. You can increase the contrast, you can reduce motion, and for hearing, there's subtitles and captioning can be turned on, and it goes on like that. So if for example I turn on larger text, you can slide across to generally make it bigger. But I think at this stage I'll just pass it around. Have a look at that.
Did you mention voice to text on there? That's just another one. Instead of picturing, can't read text. So, voice to text. That's fairly complex, and some of the Samsungs have that as a feature, and it's sometimes okay. So it just depends, but it's definitely worth looking at. I can pass around my phone as well. As long as you don't look at my messages or something like that. You might find. I can't hear you, sorry. And the mic, please. WhatsApp is a messaging system, yeah.
And send as a text message. So I can show you what I'm doing. That's another time you want to do. But I'll show you.
And can you talk in the microphone? While we're doing this, Roger, you might not be aware we're recording the session.
This trust is always about literacy and not being literate and being able to communicate. It just seems to me that it's a huge area that's not being covered. There's no voice to text and easily assistance if you can't read. You're showing up what's in the population.
Yeah, can I say that there is some voice control with some of these products, and you can sometimes train it, and sometimes you have some particular voice interface. So yes.
And this one that does mean via internet, so you've got connectivity as one thing, also across the
it's a matter of matching, and it's not straightforward. It depends. Each person might need something slightly different, and so it's finding the mainstream products and then putting on if the mainstream product doesn't have any inbuilt accessibility features, then you might need to put on something extra, which happened to you. And so it's finding what's right in each case. With Samsung, they do have some speech control, like answering calls with voice commands and so forth. So yeah, so there are a few there. I wanted to. With your Samsung, you would have an accessibility settings menu on that, wouldn't you? So I'll just pass this one around on the other side.
Yeah.
Oh, you're gonna? No, you can just pass it. I tried the talkback function on the Samsung on my own phone, and it's terrible. Maybe it's because I'm not very good doing the tapping. I have no problems otherwise, but the interface is what you do if you have a vision impairment and you want to use the talkback, as in the text-to-speech, is you tap once and it speaks the particular menu item, and then you tap twice if you want to select it, or you can slide it around if you want to look at other options. But my double tapping does not work very well with that phone, and I find it very frustrating. So that's me. Other people might like it. I know a number of blind people use the inbuilt text-to-speech on the iPhone and absolutely love it. And you know, it's I think a personal choice what works.
Just one thought I had, because something I had discussed previously, there are so many applications out there, so many things available. I think today we all know there are things we have on our phones that we never really had. The importance is we are looking not just getting the right application, the right software for each person, is that there is really good training that comes with it. Because just to have the application and download it, we're not going to get the most out of it unless you have someone who really sit down one-to-one and do training and then come back after a couple of weeks and say, how are you doing? What else? Because I think that we're going to lose out a lot on maybe getting funding, spending money on things if we're not getting everything we can out of them. So training must be part of that.
I totally agree, Pat, and there's been studies done about assistive technology that has been put in cupboards because persons have bought it, or it's been bought for them, which is the worst thing out. And then they've been told, here you have a great piece of software, and given a bit of an intro, and away you go. It doesn't work that way. It just doesn't work. People need to, as you say, be trained, to be followed up, to find out what the barriers are, what works, what doesn't work. Can we tweak the device or the software in some way? And so training needs always to be costed in to any purchases. Okay, so we've covered off some of these things. Because we only have you know, a relatively short time, I'm not going to go into, you know, particular apps for particular people. Maybe with the exception of Roger when it comes to speech, because that is a very specific issue. But I also wanted to mention accessible websites. So there are accessible mainstream products, but accessible websites are lagging behind. And the problem is that there are so many web developers now who say, oh, we can create a beautiful website for you, but they are really not familiar with web accessibility. And there are international standardized guidelines that have been developed over many, many years through an international body called W3C. And they're called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines version 2. And they might seem a bit daunting to some developers, but they can be broken down into key things that need to be done. And some of them might be that it works for blind people using screen reading software, and some of those things are like when you have photos or images, there needs to be what's called an alt tag. So there's a bit of a description behind each of a photo, and it might be like, if it's a government website, for example, let's say some of those photos were up on the website for MMR in action. So this is an easy one because you've got a photo and then it's got a caption already. Bone fishing in Aitutaki, educating our young people, and patrol boarding team. So that's the sort of thing you would put behind, like a caption for each of the photos. But often it's forgotten, and especially if there's a link on the photo. For example, the patrol boarding team. If that's a link on that photo to more details about the patrol boarding team, a blind person doesn't know that that's what they would be clicking on if there wasn't that descriptive text, because all it would say was image. That's useless. So it's just one example. Good contrast makes sense. You know, we find it a little bit difficult seeing that because we have a very bright room. And you know, no fault of the organisers, it just happens to be a bright room. But on a website there is that controlled environment where you can have really good contrast. And here we have one that is for people, say, who might have learning disabilities. Intuitive and consistent layout. That's good for everyone. Everyone. So if you're on a website and you have a navigation bar on the left or across the top, keep it there as you go and drill down to various web pages. It makes it so much easier to navigate. And then there's more and more multimedia coming up on websites. So people with hearing impairments or who are deaf, they don't know what's on the videos if they're not captioned. So again, think about that. There are now tools that Google has and YouTube where you can do auto captioning. It doesn't work that well, but you can tweak it. But it takes a little bit of time. But It's certainly possible to do. Now, these are just some things. There's much, much more to consider. I'm not saying that it's a walk in the park. It requires a little bit of an effort, but there are a number of web developers, certainly in Australia and New Zealand, who know about web accessibility, because partly the government in Australia has what's called a Web Accessibility National Transition Strategy that all government websites need to meet level AA, as it's called, of this Web Content Accessibility Guidelines by the end of this year, actually. And there's been a team working with each of the government departments to help them do this. And from that, there are businesses out there who concentrate on developing accessible websites because there's a demand from the government. And these are the sort of things that, you know, sure, it's easy to say, oh, it's too hard, we can't do it. But if the government says we have to have accessible websites, well, then it will happen. And I should just divert a little bit because we talked a bit about employment, and I've done some research in the past about what's called public procurement and accessibility in ICT. And public procurement means government purchasing of ICT equipment. And in the US, there is a requirement for procurement officials to follow accessibility guidelines and say, okay, with a request for tender for office equipment, for phones, for a particular government ministry, the request for tender states that there needs to be accessibility built in. And why, I mean, apart from Microsoft and Apple being good corporate citizens, that's nice, but they have a commercial interest to do this because it means that they would be able to win government tenders. So they're just things to think about too. Do I have?
These websites we can access and has these features.
You can look at my own website, gsa.com.au. It's just a very small website showing what I do. You won't see anything different. It's a website with lots of photos in it, but it's behind the scenes. It's accessible. I have a toolbar on my laptop for web accessibility. So with any website, I can do a very quick automated check to see if there are accessibility errors. That doesn't take away from the need to have a person who has a vision impairment or hearing impairment or a person with a physical disability to manually check it, because the automated checker might say, oh, okay, there's something in the field there for the alt tag for the photograph description, as I mentioned. But that might just say image 24, and the automated checker won't know that. But I can check it manually, or it's even better to have a blind person checking it. And I can give you the website for the government department in Australia that is doing the National Transition Strategy. This is out of the Australian Government Information Management Office under the Department of Finance, actually. So let me do that later, and so you can have a look at that.
So does your website have so people can?
No, it doesn't look any different. it's really up to the person themselves who has the need for a screen reading program to be able to use that screen reading program to use the website. If we had a person with a vision impairment, they could actually demonstrate that for you, and that's the absolute best way to show how they use a website when they can't see the screen, and how they quickly go through all the tabs, they go through all the links, and that's spoken out to them through their screen reading software and the speech synthesis. So, beg your pardon? No, no, no. Well, first of all, we can't expect every government agency to put that on, because that's very, very specific, but what we and it wouldn't quite work when it comes to the complexity of a website. But what we can expect a government agency to do is to meet those international guidelines. I'll show you afterwards on my laptop how that accessibility bar works, and how I can check any website to see if it's accessible or not. The best thing would be to actually demonstrate it, but you need a blind person to do that. You need the expert to show how they use it. I can see that we need to talk some more, and we'll do that. Great, fantastic. Okay, all right. Give me could you give me the website address, and I'll look at it now. Unfortunately, this isn't connected to the data projector, and hopefully I'll be able to connect it. Yeah, well, it's just you won't see anything different. It will look like any other website, but I can show you the toolbar, how that works.
Did you say that you were connectivity on the screen? Because it's really hard going down with one piece.
I can't. Yeah. I can't. I don't have a data cables with a map, and I've only got the accessibility toolbar on my own. Well, I can pass this around. Yeah. So for those who are looking at it, and just to prepare when it comes around, you'll see the website, but I've clicked on that toolbar, and it comes on a yellow bar saying it hasn't detected any accessibility errors. And then it gives little boxes around where you need to check to see is this really true or not, and that gives you that extra. It's a lovely machine. It really is. Okay. Now, we were, I think, supposed to finish at 12, but I don't see any movement.
We have a website now. What do we need to do to make that accessible so that someone with screen reading technology, etc., what do we have to do to our website? And if it's an application do we have to get someone to do it for us? It costs a lot of money. Is there any way we can do it ourselves? And as Rebecca said, if we have to do it ourselves, can NGOs, is it something each NGO would pay for, or is it something collectively we would say? I mean, I know nothing about this at all, but I mean, if it was something that said, right, you need this application, you can do this with your website, it's going to cost money, can several NGOs all access the same thing, or do we all have to get someone to do our websites for us?
Yeah. Do you use, do you know if you use a content management system?
No, I don't. I don't know, just someone said boring, in fact, such as like WordPress, we have a website,
WordPress.
and we're now thinking about, okay, we're going to have to pay.
Yes.
So what do we pay, what do we want, what's the next step?
Yes.
Pay, we want to make sure we're getting the right thing.
Yes. Okay. You have to go? Oh, okay. All right. Will you be here tomorrow? You will be? Yes. Will we see you tomorrow or not? Yeah? Okay. Have a look, search online for Say So. Otherwise, you know, I'm happy to well, this afternoon, have a look yourself, see if it's something, if you can download a trial and see if it works, and maybe we can talk about it tomorrow. I haven't checked myself, but it seems to maybe meet some of your requirements. Okay.
Tomorrow the girls do the HCI there's an order it's more special funding.
Tomorrow is much more discussion on policy. It's going to be a lot drier for them, I think. So they need to make a decision if it's worth their while. Well, that'd be great. I'll see you tomorrow then. Now, yes, as I was saying, with WordPress, there's a number of these content management systems, or there's WordPress as Drupal. They're quite popular, and sometimes they have accessibility plugins. Sometimes they could be doing a whole lot better. I needed to anyway. So I would need to have a quick look, and I can do that when I get my laptop back, to see how your website's going. Yeah. Did you? We can pass it. You can pass it around now if you wish. No, that's right. It looks like any other website. I can't hear you.
So the websites for language around accessibility games, so we look online for
yeah.
developing around cycle
yes. Good, and thank you. And maybe which organisation is that?
It's Be Accessible.
Oh yes.
It's an NGO that started about 4 or 5 years ago in New Zealand, and if you know Philip Paxton, he was at the meeting studio. Yeah, so he was one of the facilitators, and yeah, so I participate in the leadership of the meeting. It's quite it's that moving on from the social model of disability towards more accessible model, so what you're talking about brings health to everybody, issues everyone, so it's, yeah, it's cool, a lot.
Thank you. And I also want to mention there are some great tools around. There's an organisation in Australia called Media Access Australia that have developed a little guide for service providers on accessibility. And there's also on the W3C website a lot of links to tutorials on web accessibility, but thank you for that. But there's sometimes it might be, oh wow, there's more information than you really need. So you need to be selective as to what is right for you. And I think Be Accessible and also the Media Access Australia, and I'll provide a web link to that. And I will also check the accessibility of your site, which I can do right this minute. Now just tell me again the URL, please. What is it? Oh, I was thinking of your website. CIADC13. CIADC.
National Disability Council. So CINDC.
Yeah, I've got it. I've looked at it before, so yes, it's fine. And it has some visibility, accessibility errors, yes. So you can have a look at that.
Just a short time ago.
Anyway, I think we might need to start wrapping up. I'm going to hand out some evaluation forms, and if you wouldn't mind just filling out those, thank you. So, just to finish off, we're talking about changing interfaces, mobile delivery, and we've seen the difference it makes with mobile phones, smartphones, and so forth. And they can provide new options, but also challenges. And I was just quickly going to talk about a few examples for hardware, people who might have difficulty holding a mouse. They are large mice, trackballs that you can just move around like that. There are single switches that you can hit that then connect to the computer. And the list is very, very long. And we've talked a lot about screen reading. We haven't talked so much about literacy tools, but again, going to the independent living centres, you'll find a lot of information. There's a company called Spectronics, based in New Zealand, I think, and they provide, while it's a commercial company, they do provide a lot of guides as to suitable tools and links to where to go. I was going to do the Say So demo, but we'll leave that, and I've mentioned the independent living centres. I'm just wondering how your time is here, because I just thought if there was things that we hadn't talked about in regard to what's being used, what works well, what's missing, and how you will get it. Now, I've already heard a number of examples from you, But if there's anything you'd like to add to what you've already mentioned, be very interested.
Stuck on your image we can't anymore. I told you it's all about your image. Can't escape from that. Oh. Yes. It's your brain to touch someone's life. Okay. Thank you.
That's fine. So today we've talked about what internet accessibility means for people with disability. We've shared some personal stories. We've talked about different sort of software and hardware. So I hope that we've been able to share something which you might be able to take away with you. It's not possible to go into detail about all sorts of different technology, but to give you a starting point about things to think about. So that's today, and tomorrow we're looking at capacity building for internet accessibility policy development. So it will be quite a different sort of workshop, talking about policies, talking about that on an international, regional and national basis, and talking about how to make change. How do we make change? And we've already talked about that today, about communicating across the silos. But we'll be discussing it in a bit more systematic way tomorrow. So for those who would like to, it would be great to have you here tomorrow as well.
Thank you.
It's got a good job for
Thank you.
So you have to look at the cost of those equipment. Again, it was a list of items that said that people need to be able to access them. Let's check the
Well, the difficulty is that there are so many different things. So it's hard to say just this or that. But what I could say is, if we're looking at a telecenter, for example, a telecenter, like a community center that has internet availability for the community, might be. I think there's one in Seattle Island, Mangaya. Yes, and I think it's a tourist information center, a museum, and also has a telecenter with internet access. So bringing all of those facilities together, then what you can do is make sure that there is a ramp or level entrance into the building. You can make sure that there is a reasonably accessible toilet, wide enough door, and when it comes to the equipment itself, you need to talk to that community. It's a small island, so there's no point in putting a lot of software and hardware that's not going to be used. So that's why I can't say you need to find out. And so one of the things that's really, really important in this whole exercise is to be able to survey people with disability all over the Cooks. They're here, Aitutaki, the outer islands, and find out what, if they use anything internet related, what they would need based on their disability, and what they would like. So it's not for me to say, hey, this is what you should have, this is a template. Unfortunately, it's not that straightforward. So this could be a really useful and valuable activity for the National Disability Council to do that type of survey. So next time you're running workshops across the islands, if you can maybe include something like that. I would be very keen to run a train-the-trainer program, for example, where the key people who might be able to pass on training about internet skills. But you need to have that framework. But it's also getting the information. That's really important. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, no, that's right. So it has to be appropriate in this environment. And I mean, I'm hoping through ITU to maybe run a kind of project. We can't do the Cooks because Cook Islands is not a member, but it might in future, might take years and years to have something across many different Pacific Island nations. Who knows? Because we're looking at things like doing the surveys, getting that information first, and then checking out the policies, the ICT policies, the disability policies, where they can be linked up, any legislation and regulation, and then developing a toolkit for government to work with that, and then looking at websites, doing some audits of government websites, and looking at then some training in accessibility and websites. So there's a lot of steps to take, and it's a matter of, and I don't mean for it to sound too daunting. We all know that there's so much work in the disability area, but you start small. From little things, big things grow, there's some Australian songs. so yeah, we'll see. Okay. Well, that's right, exactly. Okay. All right. Yeah, finished.
Well, that's us for today. If I can ask the paper to process of prayer, please.
Thank you for listening today.